Avoidants don't come back directly. They come back through tests, and if you mistake tests for proof, you'll lose your power fast, because tests are not commitments, they're information gathering. A dismissive avoidant rarely returns with a clean confession. They don't usually show up and say, "I miss you, I was wrong, I'm ready." That kind of direct emotional exposure is exactly what their nervous system avoids. So instead, they approach sideways. They test the water before they step in. And if you don't recognize what you're seeing, you'll start building a future on a breadcrumb. You'll start giving relationship benefits to someone who hasn't shown relationship responsibility yet. A test is a low-risk move designed to answer a question without paying the full price of vulnerability. That's the simplest definition. They're not necessarily trying to manipulate you. They're trying to protect themselves. Dismissive avoidants often learn that needing is dangerous, that emotions create obligation, that closeness can lead to being controlled, criticized, or disappointed. So their system is built around autonomy and self-protection. When they think about coming back, the desire for connection and the fear of connection activate at the same time. Tests are how they manage that conflict. They want to know what happens if I lean in, but they don't want to feel trapped if it goes wrong. This is why the pattern nobody sees coming matters. Most people think the only return is a message, but the return begins earlier with small probes, a story view, a like, a meme, a casual question, a late-night check-in. Those are not always random. They are often step one of testing. It's their nervous system inching closer while keeping their ego safe. And your nervous system, especially if you're anxious or emotionally attached, interprets those probes as hope. You feel that rush. Finally, they're thinking about me. Finally, they're back. But that rush is exactly what makes you lose your power, because you start responding as if you've already been chosen. Here's what losing your power looks like. You respond instantly. You respond with paragraphs. You try to lock the conversation down. You ask for explanations. You tell them how much you missed them. You offer reassurance. You soften your boundaries. You turn a probe into full access. And once you do that, two things happen. First, the avoidant gets what they wanted, comfort without accountability. Second, their urgency drops, because the discomfort that was motivating them to test disappears. They regain the sense of access and control, and once they feel in control, they often retreat again. That's how people end up in the most painful loop. They come back just enough to reopen the wound, then disappear when it gets real. The purpose of tests is to reduce uncertainty. Avoidants hate uncertainty more than they hate distance, because uncertainty means they're not in control. So when they start thinking about you, they test to answer questions like, is the door open? Are they angry? Are they still available? Did they move on? Will I be rejected? Will they pressure me? Will this become intense? Will I be expected to commit? Tests are the avoidance way of collecting data before choosing whether to risk a real reconnection. And if you respond with emotional flooding, you give them a lot of data, but you also confirm one fear, that closeness with you will be emotionally intense. Even if your intensity is loving, their nervous system reads it as pressure. This keynote is not teaching you to become cold or to play games. It's teaching you to recognize the difference between a test and a decision. A test is a toe dip. A decision is a step forward. A test is ambiguous. A decision is clear. A test asks for comfort. A decision offers effort. So instead of reacting to the test like it's proof, you treat it like what it is, information. And when you treat it as information, your response changes. You match the level. You stay warm but brief. You don't punish. You don't chase. You respond once and you let them come forward. Because if they truly want to come back, they will move beyond testing into intention. They will ask to talk. They will make a plan. They will address what happened. They will show up in daylight, not only in late-night nostalgia. They will move from small probes to consistent behavior. But if they don't, you will know quickly. They will remain in testing mode, hovering, breadcrumbing, checking for access, and disappearing once they feel reassured. And that is the clarity you need. Because the deepest danger is not being left. The deepest danger is being kept in a cycle where tests keep you emotionally hooked while nothing real is built. So the first keynote is the foundation. Don't worship tests. Don't panic over tests. Don't interpret tests as proof. Tests are the avoidance way of approaching without committing. Your job is to protect your dignity while you observe whether the tests evolve into effort. Because the only return that matters is the one that comes with consistency. The access test is the first and most common move a dismissive avoidant makes before coming back, because it lets them check if you're still emotionally available without risking the vulnerability of a real conversation. It's small on purpose. It's designed to be deniable. It's meant to feel casual, even meaningless, so that if you respond negatively, they can retreat without humiliation. And if you respond warmly, they can come closer with the comfort of knowing the door is still open. This is why the access test can be so confusing. It doesn't look like love. It looks like nothing. A story view. A like on a post. A reaction emoji, a meme. A random hey. A quick check, and that doesn't lead anywhere. And because it looks like nothing, your mind does the most exhausting thing. It tries to make meaning out of crumbs. You start analyzing the timing. You start rereading tone. You start asking yourself if it's intentional. And the truth is, often it is intentional, not in the sense that they sat down with a plan to manipulate you, but in the sense that their nervous system is seeking information while staying protected. What information are they seeking? One word: access. Do I still have a place in your world? Can I still reach you? Can I still get warmth from you? Are you still soft? Are you still waiting? Are you still attached? Are you still willing to respond quickly? Because for a dismissive avoidant, emotional access is both comforting and scary. It's comforting because it gives them a sense of security. Someone still cares, someone is still there. It's scary because if access turns into expectation, they feel trapped. So they test with the smallest possible move that can give them reassurance without creating a commitment. Here's why the access test comes first. After distance, an avoidant often feels relief, but when your absence becomes real, they start feeling discomfort, uncertainty, loss of control. That discomfort pushes them toward you. But they don't want to risk rejection or accountability, so they choose a low-risk poke. It's like knocking on a door with your pinky finger and pretending you weren't knocking if nobody answers. That's plausible deniability, and it's a huge part of dismissive avoidant behavior. They protect the ego at all costs. Now the dangerous part is how your nervous system responds. When you care, a tiny sign from them feels enormous. It feels like oxygen after holding your breath, so you rush. You respond fast. You respond big. You respond with your full heart. You ask questions. You reopen the entire relationship in one reply. And the moment you do that, you pass the access test in a way that costs you, because you give them maximum reassurance with minimum effort from them. They didn't have to apologize. They didn't have to explain. They didn't have to commit. They didn't have to face your standards. They just had to poke, and you did the rest. And then something predictable happens. They feel relief. That relief is not love deepening, it's their nervous system settling. They think, okay, I still have access. I'm not rejected. The door is open. And once their system settles, the urgency to pursue disappears because the discomfort that motivated the test is gone. So they retreat again. They respond slower. They go quiet. They become vague. And now you feel crushed because you thought the poke meant they were coming back, but it was just an access check. This is why so many people feel like avoidants, come back just to leave again. They're not necessarily coming back. They're checking. So how do you respond in a way that protects your power without playing games? You match the level. If they like a post, you don't run to message them. If they send hey, you can respond with a calm, hey, hope you're well. And then you stop. You don't flood. You don't chase the conversation. You let them take the next step. Because the point is not to prove you're available. The point is to see if they have intention. Intention shows up when they move beyond the poke into something real, a direct message with substance, a plan, an apology, a conversation in daylight, a willingness to address what happened. If they truly want to come back, they will accept a slower pace. They will step forward again. They will tolerate not being instantly rewarded. But if they only wanted reassurance, they will fade the moment you don't give them the full comfort hit. And that fading is your answer. The access test is not a sign you should chase. It's a sign you should steady yourself. It's proof they're curious, but it's not proof they've changed. The real win is not passing their test by giving them access. The real win is using their test to get your clarity. Do they want to build? Or do they just want to know you're still there? The emotional temperature test is the moment a dismissive avoidant checks what kind of emotional climate they're walking into. Because for them, the biggest fear is not always rejection. It's emotional intensity. Many dismissive avoidants can tolerate someone being upset with them more than they can tolerate someone needing them. They can handle anger because anger feels clear and external. But they struggle with emotional vulnerability because vulnerability feels like obligation. Vulnerability feels like pressure. Vulnerability feels like being responsible for someone else's emotional state. So before they come back, they often test the temperature to see whether reconnecting will feel safe and controlled, or whether it will feel overwhelming and demanding. This test is subtle, and that's why people miss it. It doesn't look like a test. It can look like teasing, a slightly provocative comment, a casual reference to something that used to trigger you. A joke. That could either be playful or disrespectful depending on how you take it. Sometimes they'll say something like, "You're still mad at me," or "Don't start with the drama," or "I know you overthink," in a light tone. Sometimes they'll bring up the past in a way that could spark emotion. Remember when you got upset about that? or you always took things personally. They're watching for one thing. Will you react strongly? Will you flood? Will you spiral? Will you punish? Will you demand? Will this become intense? Because in their mind, intensity equals danger. If they sense emotional intensity, a dismissive avoidant often doesn't think, oh good, they care. They think, I'm about to be pulled into a conversation where I have to perform emotionally, explain myself, reassure, and possibly fail. And failing feels like shame. So they avoid the shame by avoiding the conversation. That's why people feel like avoidants disappear the moment things get serious. They're not disappearing because they don't care at all. They're disappearing because their nervous system is screaming, too much, too close, too risky. So the emotional temperature test is them dipping their toe into the emotional atmosphere. It's like checking the weather before going outside. If it feels stormy, they stay inside. If it feels calm, they're more likely to step out. Now here's the part that helps your viewer most. The goal is not to stay calm so you can win them. The goal is to stay regulated so you can protect yourself and keep your power. Because if you fail this test by exploding, you don't just push them away, you also hand them an excuse. They can tell themselves, see, this is why I don't come back, it's too intense, it's unsafe. And if you fail it by collapsing into anxiety and flooding them with emotion, you confirm their fear that reconnecting means being responsible for your emotional world. Either way, they retreat, and you end up feeling like you were too much. But you were not too much for having feelings. You were too much for their current capacity. So how do you respond in a way that passes the test without losing yourself? You respond like an emotionally mature adult. You don't overreact. You don't underreact. You don't pretend you're fine if you're not. You simply stay grounded. If they tease, you don't get hooked. You can respond with lightness or neutrality, and you don't chase the conversation. If they provoke, you don't explode, you set a calm boundary. Something like, I'm not doing sarcasm or jabs. If you want to talk, I'm open. Or, I'm good with a real conversation, not a poke. That's powerful because it communicates two things at once, calm and standards. This is where avoidants feel something they rarely encounter, emotional steadiness. Steadiness is different from coldness. Coldness feels like punishment. Steadiness feels like safety. Steadiness says, I'm not here to fight, and I'm also not here to be disrespected. Steadiness means you don't have to raise your voice to be firm. You don't have to beg to be loved. You don't have to threaten to be taken seriously. Your tone does the work. And you should also watch what they do after you stay steady. If they were testing temperature and you stayed regulated, a dismissive avoidant who has capacity will often soften. They'll become more direct. They'll move from teasing to actual conversation. They'll step a little closer. But a dismissive avoidant who only wanted to test for comfort might still retreat, because even calm boundaries feel like pressure to someone who wants access without accountability. So the emotional temperature test reveals something crucial, not whether you can handle them, but whether they can handle reality, because a real relationship includes emotion. It includes discomfort. It includes repair. If they can only return when everything is light and easy and casual, that's not a return, that's a visit. And the way you respond to this test helps you find out quickly whether they're coming back to build or coming back to test, whether you're still there to soothe them. The independence test is one of the most revealing tests a dismissive avoidant uses because it has very little to do with ego and everything to do with nervous system safety. Before they come back, they are quietly asking one question: am I walking into a situation where I will be needed in a way that feels consuming, or am I walking towards someone who is self-led? And the answer to that question determines whether they lean in or disappear again. Dismissive avoidants are wired around autonomy. Independence is not just a preference for them, it's a survival strategy. Somewhere in their emotional history, they learned that relying on others, or having others rely too heavily on them, leads to pressure, disappointment, or loss of control. So when they consider reconnecting, they are not only thinking about you, they are thinking about how your life looks without them. Are you still standing, or are you waiting? Are you still living, or are you frozen? Are you grounded in yourself, or are you orbiting around the idea of them? This is why they watch quietly. They check your social media. They ask casual questions like, what have you been up to lately? Or, how's life been treating you? They notice your energy. They notice whether your posts feel heavy or light. They notice whether your world seems to have collapsed or expanded. And again, this isn't always conscious manipulation. It's their nervous system scanning for pressure. Here's the part that feels counterintuitive to most people. The more you look like you are waiting, the less safe it feels for them to return. Waiting feels like expectation. Waiting feels like obligation. Waiting feels like, if I come back, I'll be responsible for their happiness. And responsibility is what dismissive avoidants fear most. They don't want to be someone's emotional regulator. They don't want to be needed in a way that feels like they'll lose themselves. So if they sense that your life paused when they left, their instinct is not to come save you, it's to protect themselves by staying away. On the other hand, independence feels safe to them. Independence signals this person has a life. This person can stand on their own. This person won't collapse if I need space. This person won't trap me with their need. And ironically, that safety makes closeness feel more possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. Because closeness without pressure is the only kind of closeness a dismissive avoidant can tolerate. This is why people say things like, "They came back when I stopped caring," or "They reached out when I was finally moving on." It's not magic. It's nervous system math. When you stop centering them, you remove the pressure they associate with intimacy. You become a choice instead of a responsibility. And choice feels lighter than obligation. But here's where people misunderstand the independence test and accidentally turn it into a performance. Independence is not pretending you don't care. It's not posting fake happiness. It's not acting detached while you're actually spiraling. Avoidants are surprisingly sensitive to incongruence. They can feel when independence is real versus when it's a mask. Real independence is quiet. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's simply you living your life or using them as the emotional center. Real independence looks like this. You still feel things, but you don't broadcast them to provoke a response. You still miss them, but you don't reach out to relieve the feeling. You still care, but you don't put your life on hold. You invest in your routines. You reconnect with friends. You build momentum in your work. You create structure in your days. And over time, your nervous system settles. You're not constantly checking your phone. You're not measuring your worth by their silence. That grounded energy is what avoidants notice. And when they notice it, it does something uncomfortable inside them. It removes a form of control they didn't even realize they had. They can no longer assume you'll always be there waiting. They can no longer assume they are the emotional center of your world. And that can trigger two reactions. One is attraction, because your independence feels strong and stable. The other is fear, because losing you becomes real. That's why this test is not about convincing them. It's about revealing the truth. If your independence makes them step closer, it means they can tolerate a relationship that doesn't require control. If your independence makes them disappear, it means they were only comfortable when they had the upper hand. Either way, you get clarity. And here's the most important part. You don't pass the independence test by doing something for them. You pass it by doing something for yourself. By reclaiming your life. By refusing to stay frozen in anticipation. By choosing growth over waiting. The independence test is not about showing them you don't need them. It's about proving to yourself that you don't abandon yourself. Because the deepest power shift happens when your independence is no longer a strategy to get them back, but a foundation for your life. At that point, whether they come back or not stops being the question. The question becomes, if they do come back, do they add to the life I've built, or do they pull me back into a cycle I've outgrown? And that's the level of clarity this test is designed to reveal. The consequences test is the moment a dismissive avoidant tries to slide back in like nothing happened, and your response determines whether this return becomes a real rebuilding or just another loop with a fresh start. This is the test that exposes the truth most clearly, because it's not about chemistry, it's not about missing you, it's not about what they say, it's about whether access to you requires accountability now or whether they can still get comfort without paying the price of repair. Dismissive avoidants often prefer resets over repairs. A reset is easy. A reset means we don't talk about the hard parts. We don't name the withdrawal. We don't process the pain. We don't discuss the inconsistency. We just start texting again, flirting again, being normal again. A reset protects their ego and keeps them away from shame. A repair is harder. Repair requires them to tolerate discomfort, admit impact, take ownership, and stay present while you have feelings. For many dismissive avoidants, repair feels like emotional exposure, and emotional exposure feels unsafe. So when they start coming back, they often attempt to reset first, to see if you'll allow it. This is the consequences test. They reach out casually, they act friendly, they bring up something random, they send a meme, they ask how you've been, they may even flirt, but they carefully avoid the topic of what happened. They're checking, can I return without accountability? Can I re-enter your world and regain closeness while skipping the part that would require me to face myself? And your nervous system, if you've been waiting, is vulnerable here. Because the contact feels like relief. It feels like the drought ended. It feels like, finally, I'm not abandoned. And because you don't want to lose the moment, you may accept the reset. You may go along with the casual tone. You may laugh and act normal. You may avoid bringing up the past because you're afraid it will scare them away. You may tell yourself, let's just keep it light, let's not ruin it. That's understandable, But if you do that, you teach them the most damaging lesson, that the cost of leaving is low, and the cost of returning is even lower. That lesson is what keeps the cycle alive. Because once they learn they can slide in and out without consequence, they will. Not always consciously, but as a nervous system habit. They will come close when they want warmth, disappear when intimacy feels heavy, then return when they feel lonely or unsettled. And every time you accept a reset, you become the person who absorbs the damage so the relationship can continue without growth. So what does consequence actually mean in a healthy way? It does not mean punishment. It does not mean anger. It does not mean lectures, interrogation, or emotional ambush. Consequence means standards. It means you don't upgrade someone back into your life at the deepest level until the rupture is addressed. It means you can be kind and still be clear. It means you can respond warmly, but you don't pretend nothing happened. A mature consequence response sounds calm and simple. It could be as small as, "I'm open to talking, but I'd need us to be honest about what happened," or "I'm not interested in going back to how it was. If we reconnect, it has to be different." That's it. No long speech, no begging, no explaining for an hour, just clarity. Because clarity is what an avoidant cannot hide behind. Now watch what happens next. If they have capacity, they may not love that moment, but they will stay. They might need a second to process, but they will move toward the conversation. They will show willingness to repair, to hear you, to take responsibility, to discuss how things will change. That willingness is the most important sign you can get, because it means they're not just returning for comfort, they're returning with the possibility of growth. If they don't have capacity, the consequences test will trigger them. They will avoid the conversation. They will minimize, they will deflect, they will get vague, they will become irritated. They might say you're bringing up the past, or making it a big deal, or starting drama, or why can't we just move forward? And those phrases are a tell. They are telling you they want access without accountability. They want the benefits without the repair. They want the reset. And this is where the consequences test becomes a gift, even if it hurts, because it saves you from confusing contact with change. It saves you from investing months into a reconnection that was never built on repair. It shows you whether they're willing to do the hard part when it's inconvenient. The consequences test also protects your future self. Because if you accept a reset now, you will pay for it later. Later, when they pull away again, you'll feel even more foolish. Later, when you finally bring up the pattern, they'll say, "But things were fine," because you helped create the illusion that nothing happened. Consequence now prevents heartbreak later. So this keynote is the line between fantasy and reality. A dismissive avoidant coming back is not proven by them reaching out. It's proven by them staying present when standards appear. Anyone can return for comfort. Only someone with capacity can return for repair. And the consequences test is how you find out which one you're dealing with. The consistency test is the final twist, because it's where you find out whether they were coming back to build something real, or coming back to check if the old pull still works. And what makes this test so sneaky is that it doesn't happen in one message. It happens over days, sometimes weeks, in the quiet space after the initial reconnection glow fades. In the beginning, a dismissive avoidant can show up with surprising warmth. They can text more. They can flirt. They can seem engaged. They can sound like the person you always hoped they could be. And your nervous system relaxes. You think, finally we're back. But the consistency test begins the moment the novelty wears off and real life returns, because that's when their old coping patterns try to reassert themselves. A dismissive avoidant's default coping strategy is distance when intimacy rises. So after a few days of closeness, they often unconsciously pull back to regulate. Replies slow down. Plans become vague. Their energy shifts. They might still be around, but less present. They might disappear for a day and come back like nothing happened. And they're watching what you do. Not in a cruel, mastermind way, but in a nervous system way. They're watching whether you will resume the old role, the role where you overfunction emotionally so they can function and still keep the connection. This is the test. Will the old pattern still be possible? Because if it is, the avoidant relaxes back into it. If they can pull away and you chase, that proves to them they can have closeness without fully committing. If they can go quiet and you send paragraphs, that proves to them you will stabilize the relationship for them. If they can offer crumbs and you treat it like effort, that proves to them minimal investment still earns maximum access. And once that's proven, the avoidant's motivation to change fades, because the relationship is back to being comfortable for them. That's why the consistency test is so important. It's not about catching them. It's about catching the dynamic. It reveals whether the reconnection is built on growth or just built on a temporary emotional wave. Now, here's how you pass this test in a way that protects you. You don't respond to the slowdown with panic. You don't escalate. You don't start interrogating them. You don't do the emotional labor on their behalf. You simply stay steady and match reality. If they slow down, you don't speed up to compensate. If they get vague, you don't chase clarity from vagueness. If they disappear for a day, you don't send 5 messages trying to pull them back. You let the space exist without collapsing inside it. That is the moment you become unshakable. And this does 2 powerful things. First, it keeps you regulated. Your peace stays intact because you are not making their behavior your entire emotional focus. Second, it forces the avoidant to face a choice. If they want you, they will have to come forward without you dragging them. They will have to show effort without you rewarding crumbs. They will have to maintain closeness without using distance as their regulator. This is where you see who they really are. A dismissive avoidant with capacity will adjust. They might not be perfect, but they will notice the shift. They will feel that you are not chasing. And because you are not chasing, they will realize the connection requires their participation. They will return with more steadiness. They will explain when they need space. They will keep plans. They will communicate more responsibly. They will try to meet the standard, not because you demanded it in a dramatic way, but because you embodied it calmly. A dismissive avoidant without capacity will start doing what they've always done. They will reappear only when it suits them. They will give you bursts of attention and then vanish. They will avoid accountability conversations. They will keep you in the gray zone. And if you don't chase, they may even accuse you of being distant, because they're used to you over-functioning. They may try to bait you into the old role, because the old role kept them comfortable. So the consistency test is also the self-respect test. It asks you, will you abandon yourself to keep them close? Will you accept a temporary return as proof of permanent change? Will you trade standards for reassurance? Because the greatest temptation during reconnection is to lower your standard just to keep the closeness alive. You tell yourself, it's fine, they're just busy. They're just stressed, it's early. I don't want to ruin it. And maybe sometimes it is stress. But consistent love doesn't require you to be confused all the time. Consistency is not perfection, it's reliability. It's the feeling that you don't have to perform, chase, or guess. It's the feeling that closeness doesn't get punished with distance. That's what you're looking for. And this is why the consistency test is the final twist. Because the avoidant is not only testing you, life itself is testing them. Can they stay present when intimacy grows? Can they show up when the novelty fades? Can they build trust slowly and steadily? If they can, the return becomes real. If they can't, the return was just a loop opening again. And if you stay steady through this test, you win either way. If they rise, you build something healthier. If they don't, you don't get trapped. You keep your dignity, your peace, and your future.